the civil rights movements that we know of now historically that were from the 50s through the 60s had at its spearhead Black and Jewish communities, that there were Black and Jewish leaders together. And so those comments, particularly the first clip that you played from the late 60s, because Dr. King, of course, was assassinated in 68, he said that specifically often, both connecting the scourge of anti-Semitism as well as anti-Zionism. There was, in other words, back in the 60s, there was never any confusion that anti-Zionism was anti-Semitism. We say the first Africa-Israel summit was when the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon in Jerusalem. So you can go back 3,000 years, whether you want to do it from there in the region or here. This Africa-Israel Black Jewish tie goes back literally millennia or centuries if you want to measure it here. They don't know that there's millions of slaves in Mauritania and Sudan and Algeria and Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and they are part of a 1,400-year-long slave trade that's called the Trans-Saharan slave trade, right? This happened in the 7th century, shortly after the death of Muhammad, and Islam in less than a century spread from Mecca all the way up to North Africa, where Libya and Morocco are, including parts of the Mediterranean. And what does it do? Kill, burn, destroy, especially Africans. And why are those Africans being slaughtered? Because they are Arab Muslims killing and enslaving African Christians and African Muslims because they're African. That's been going on for millennia.
Welcome to the Viktor Frankl podcast. I'm Rabbi Daniel Schonbuch, here with my co-host, attorney Lori Fein. And today we're joined by a very special guest, Pastor Dumisani Washington. He's the founder for the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, and author of Zionism and the Black Church, Why Standing with Israel Will Be a Defining Issue for Christians of Color in the 21st Century. Dumisani, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for having me. And you too, Laura.
I want to start talking about the commonality between Jews and African Americans. I think the person that brought us together in so many profound ways was MLK Jr. Let's listen to him, what he had to say in the 70s about Israel, anti-Semitism, and the Jewish people.
The whole world must see that Israel must exist and has a right to exist and is one of the great outposts of democracy in the world.
My Jewish brothers and sisters said to me amid anti-Semitism anywhere, we don't need your support. We have enough Jewish power to deal with this problem ourselves. I would still take a stand against anti-Semitism because it's wrong, it's unjust, and it's evil. If my Catholic brothers and sisters said to me, amid bigotry toward Catholics, we don't need your support in this because we have enough Catholic power to deal with it. I would still take a stand against bigotry toward Catholics because it is wrong, it is evil, and it is unjust.
You know, there's so many common things between our communities. We were both in slavery. We both fight horrific anti-Semitism. What are your thoughts about MLK Jr.'s influence, and what's happened to the relationship between the Jewish community and African Americans since then?
Well, two things addressing both your questions. So first of all, it's the civil rights movements that we know of now historically that were from the 50s through the 60s had at its spearhead Black and Jewish communities, that there were Black and Jewish leaders together. And so those comments, particularly the first clip that you played from the late 60s, because Dr. King, of course, was assassinated in 68, he said that specifically often, both connecting the scourge of anti-Semitism as well as anti-Zionism. There was, in other words, back in the 60s, there was never any confusion that anti-Zionism was anti-Semitism. That became a play on words, unfortunately, later on, but it's very, very clear that hatred for Israel was hatred for the Jewish people. And so he addressed it, but it wasn't just him. It was he spoke for the vast majority of the civil rights community. So he was the figurehead, if you will. He was the most known person. But the reason we say that is because not only was he speaking for everyone else, but when you get into the 70s, there was another movement, an organization called BASIC, started by Bayard Rustin. It was an acronym for meaning Black Americans to Support Israel Committee. So that by that time, Dr. King had been assassinated, but still, his father, his mother, his wife, many of his colleagues and friends joined this organization to basically, at that point, defend Israel against the United Nations, which was calling Zionism racism. And I'll say this one last thing too. In as much as that becomes the iconic part of the 50s and 60s in terms of the both the civil rights movement and the this picture of Dr. King and Joshua Heschel. You could go to before Dr. King was even born in the late early 1900s. Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald started this thing off at the turn of the century with the Rosenwald schools, with the Rosenwald Fellows, this black educator and this Jewish entrepreneur and philanthropist. And of all the billions of dollars that Julius Rosenwald gave away, over half of it was to the Black American community. So Dr. King wasn't born until 1929, and these guys hooked up back in 1911. So again, that goes way back. It basically it precedes Dr. King and the civil rights movement.
I think it goes even further back. The abolition movement was largely supported by the Jewish community in New York, the Dutch Jews.
Absolutely, absolutely. So and it's funny. So we say this only tongue in cheek in our organization. We say the first Africa-Israel summit was when the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon in Jerusalem. So you can go back 3,000 years, whether you want to do it from there in the region or here. This Africa-Israel Black Jewish tie goes back literally millennia or centuries if you want to measure it here.
Mm-hmm. So what inspired you to found the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel? You grew up in the United States, similar probably period to when I did, and many people in your community didn't go on your journey. So what shaped your own mission to help Israel and the Jewish community?
Well, there are several different strands of it, but the I talk about this in my book that was in 2012. So I grew up Christian, born in the segregated South in Little Rock, Arkansas, but grew up in California. So my connection to my Arkansas roots was from my parents telling me the stories, and I share a lot of that in my book as well. That kind of shaped who I was. I'm the youngest of 7 children, so we had a big family, big house, and large tribe that was even out there in the Bay Area because we moved from Little Rock to San Francisco. But my mom's sisters did as well, so it was like a huge part of Little Rock moved out there with us. So that was always a part of who I was, and church was a huge part of our identity as well. And in a, as I say, a traditional kind of Black Christian tradition, there is a lot of Zionism, a spiritual Zionism, right? The Negro spirituals are the things that born that from which gospel music came, and so these themes are always there. So there was not political Zionism. There was a lot of talk about the modern state of Israel, but my first introduction to it was in high school. My senior year of high school was 1984. And November 84, of course, was Operation Moses. So this is on TV. I have no idea what it is. I don't know what I'm looking at. I'm 17 years old looking at the screen. And that's when it was first captured in that way. But fast forward to 2012, that was my first trip to Israel. And I'm praying at the Western Wall. I'm with a group of other Black pastors with Christians United for Israel. And there, the West, so I can describe it as I was commissioned to do this, to form some sort of organization that would strengthen the alliance and the tie between Africa and Israel, the Black and Jewish community. So that's how that got. Then a few months later, 2013, IBSI was born in the summer 2013.
Yeah, that's really incredible. Talk to us about your trip to Israel, because there's so much horrible media against Israel. Now there's this horrific vilification of Jews. They're throwing all these epithets out: genocide, starvation, baby killers. Can you talk about what you saw when you actually got to Israel? Different faces, people of color, different colors, nationalities, people from all around the world were there. What did you see when you got to Israel?
Well, all of that. So for me, I always wanted to go. I was nobody important. My name just got pulled out of a hat, basically. And then I was on a trip. I knew some people who worked at CUFI, Christians United for Israel at the time. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to go. I was excited about going. And it was very much a spiritual journey and culmination for me, right? So I'll maybe say some more about that later on. But when I got there, yeah, I had never been, obviously. So all of this was new, but I was aware of the modern state of Israel by then. So I was looking for certain things, if you will, right? I knew that there were Jews from Africa, Asia, Europe. I mean, so I knew that that was the case. But obviously experiencing it there, you're walking around Jerusalem, as you said, you'll see somebody who they look like any other multi-ethnic city in the United States of America, but the people you're looking at are Jews, right? They're actually, whether religious Jews or whatever, I mean, Mizrahi Jews, and just from all over the world, literally. And then just the vibe, as our young people say, the whole thing was incredible. Um, from the land to the people, the stories, all of those things. I remember lots of things like going up to the Golan Heights and talking to these young IDF about how they are in their trainings. They're taken there and told about the Yom Kippur War, why it was so important, why it was so pivotal, what that actually means. And then to see, of course, Israel's enemies, unlike here, 1,000 miles away, right? No, they're right on the other side of that fence. They're on the other side of that barricade. I mean, they're right. It's an immediate thing. And so it puts Israel's security right there in your face because you realize that decisions are made in split seconds. The decisions are made with enemies who want to destroy you right there a few yards away. And you're having to live. So when you hear Dr. King said, an oasis of brotherhood and democracy, you get gobsmacked with that because here you are, boom, oasis, literally, you're surrounded by despotism and no democracy and that type of thing. And you're having to forge that type of meaningful relationship in a neighborhood that doesn't want you there, right? Here you are, thousands of years of a history. It's always funny when people say to me, Pastor Dumisani, if that's the Israel of the Bible, how come there's no peace? I said, have you ever read the Bible before? I mean, are you kidding me right now? Do you understand that the Jewish people have pretty much always had to defend their existence? This is not a new thing. So all those things come into light. And of course, as a Christian, going to the Sea of Galilee, going to Bethlehem, even though it's Palestinian controlled. The reality of watching our Jewish guy get off the bus because it's not safe for him to go into Bethlehem and our Arab Palestinian guy getting on the bus to then go inside of Bethlehem at that time. And all of these things, they were realities that just brought everything home. So it was an amazing trip.
Wow, that really says something that you can't enter with the same guide. I mean, I think that most people, even people who think that America's a racist country or has its own problems, I think would be shocked to experience something like that in America, where you would have to switch guides to go to a different part of, let's say, New York City.
Right, right. Well, and to that point, both your first question, Daniel, and your point, Laura, um, often the misconception of why IBSI exists is along the lines of combating anti-Semitism in the Black community. And we definitely have those conversations. We talk about the history of all of those things. But that wasn't the primary thing, if I could say it that way. The primary one was how the Black community has been used for the purpose of anti-Semitism.
Exploited. Basically, I would say exploited.
Yes,
Right.
this is how you get things like Israel's an apartheid state, Zionism is racism, everything. Not all of those things not true, but they were specific propaganda used by the KGB created PLO, as well as others, to paint Israel in that light. So when you say you're going there, yeah, people over the years, I've been to Israel some 20 times by now, and I've led lots of delegations, lots of trips, and whether they're black, white, whoever they are, often if they heard any of that propaganda, they're completely blown away. That not only is it, it's not just that it's not true, there's an apartheid state, but you see the exact opposite, right? You see there's Muslims and Druze and Christians and Baha'i and all this, and somehow they make it work, right? Here's this one nation that's the Jewish state, and its plurality of religions and different, even what I call political beliefs. I mean, you have the left, you have the right, you have this parliamentary system that only Israelis. I don't get it at all, right? But here's the thing: here's this thriving democracy. Here's this vibrant economy. Here's a life. Don't mention the food I love to eat. So just it works in a way that you would not see anywhere else in the world. So people come away from those trips going, not only was I lied to, but my God, I want to go back like now. Can I go back next week, please? So yeah, I see that 90% of the time that's the response.
Yeah.
So, I want to dig a little deeper into the what many people perceive as a disintegration, if you will, of the Black Jewish Alliance that existed so strongly and publicly in the 60s. And then today, I think that there are pockets where it still is strong, and there are various other contingencies where you see a lot of hostility, even maybe tension and jealousy. And I'm curious if you could help us understand a little bit more about how you see the different elements and where they stand vis-a-vis the Jewish community.
So one of the things that we can really underscore where Dr. King's time was and the vocal stance that he took fighting anti-Semitism, fighting Israel hatred, that type of thing, especially leading up to his death, was that he had made the statement, not verbatim, I could refer you to his last meeting. One of his last public meetings was on March 28, 10 days before he's killed, with the Rabbinical Assembly. And for people who, if you're curious, you go to rabbinicalassembly.org, you type in Dr. King, and boom, the whole transcript is there. They didn't have, Twitter back then. They didn't have iPhones back then, but they did record things right back then. I tell young people, they were recording things was a thing. And so we have that. The reason I mention that is because he talks about what is now at that time, 1968, the rise of a militant, younger faction within the Black civil rights community. People like Stokely Carmichael. He doesn't mention these people, but of course, Angela Davis, Eldridge Cleaver, Black Panthers, that type of thing. And so they are the next iteration. They are very impatient. They're very frustrated. They don't like all that nonviolent struggle. They're more of the Elijah Muhammad, Nation of Islam, Malcolm X, by any means necessary type of thing. So that anger and venom and frustration is spewed out everywhere. First of all, to quote unquote white people. When I say quote unquote white people, I'm talking about they don't even define that. They'll just say basically people who either look white or have a European ancestry. And then, of course, then to Jews, if they quote unquote look white, European, Ashkenazi, whatever term you want to use, they get lumped in that way. So some of these younger ones don't have the appreciation or even understanding of what has gone on just right before them, right? Remember I told you about Dr. King before he was born, you have that synergy between Booker T. Washington, Julius Rosenwald, the NAACP, the oldest civil rights organization on the planet, formed by Jews and African Americans, right? So this is the same thing, right? So they come in frustrated with basically everything, right? They want the whole apple cart overturned. It's awful, very much infiltrated by the communists because you have very much Fidel Castro's and again the Yasser Arafat's and everything. They're very much involved with stoking more fire, not bringing any type of peace or resolution. So a lot of the anti-Semitism comes from there because it's mixed in with the anti-Zionism. They are denouncing the quote unquote Zionists, the same things that you're hearing now. They're denouncing Israel as a white settler, occupier, colonial. These things are 60 years old in terms of them being tropes. This is some of where that came from. It never spoke for the majority of the Black community, but it was a loud vocal minority, hence the Louis Farrakhan's, hence the Elijah Muhammad's, hence the Malcolm X's, right? This is part of what was actually happening. And it was being even more instigated where the media was concerned because now you have the university starting in the 70s talking about especially the binary of communism, right? There's the proletariat versus all these things get mixed into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israel is white, settler, colonial, powerful, and the Palestinians are people of color, and therefore they're being subjugated. And that becomes the story, as twisted as that story is. And they've been telling that story for decades. This was part of it. The Black community was used in that way to say, hey, just like the civil rights movement, the Free Palestine is a quote unquote civil rights movement, right? So if you were against apartheid in South Africa, you are against the Zionist entity. That's how they use the Black community in that way. Some in the Black community got pulled into that as well. And then there still remained a huge part. There were Christian Zionists like everyone else, but it's their voices became almost muted over those decades.
How do you understand the phenomenon of people like Kanye West and people like Candace Owens? Where is that coming from? Where is her distortion? I mean, you were in the Old City. One of the things she said, I think a year or two ago, was that she went to the Old City of Jerusalem, and there's a Muslim quarter, there's a Christian quarter, there's a Jewish quarter, as if the Jewish people put people in ghettos in these four corners. Well, this is probably happening hundreds of years before that by the Ottomans putting the Jews into ghettos. How did somebody like Candace Owens arrive at such severe understandings and improper and distorted understandings of reality?
If I was a psychiatrist, I could get paid just for talking about where Candace Owens is. So let me pause and say this. I think Laura's question was be a follow-up to the other one. I'll connect them both. So Daniel, when it comes to people like Kanye and Candace, The extreme examples of what I'm saying. I mean, Kanye, who's praising Hitler and the Nazis, right? I mean, literally, right? And then Candace, who's running interference for him. And I tell people that started around the fall of 2022, and then just kind of increased from there. For them, even beyond that as a black community thing, this is a deep-seated hatred. I'll say this like I've said to other people. Some people have surmised maybe it's because of the strain of Catholicism that she became a part of. Some people say maybe she's getting paid. For me, I'm much less concerned with the why someone's doing something than what they're doing, right? When it comes to something like this. So for the hatred for the Jewish people, I mean, the blood libels, the whole matzah and the blood of Christian. I mean, that all those things that go back centuries. For Candace to kind of bring out those tropes in such a cartoonish way, but almost such a evil way, with a huge platform like that, it's to me, it's inexplicable. Other than just a very, very evil person. I'll say this as I said to other Christians as well, because as a man of faith who takes the Bible, try to take it seriously. The Bible teaches that hatred for Israel is hatred for God. Psalm 83, Psalm 1, right? These things are connected. That Jew hatred becomes a swift current that will take somebody under very quickly. So where she started off as, you know, kind of co-signing, if you will, on a lot of stuff that Kanye would say. A couple of years later, from the fall of, like I said, 2022 to now, she on her own is just this institution of, I mean, she has a podcast, and I don't know, I'm sure somebody's done the rubrics already. I would imagine 75% of her things are about Jews, right? I don't know if she can have an actual stream and not say something about Jews and Israel. It's an obsession. As unhinged as it is, it seems to just be an obsession for her. And I lastly say, I think that she seems to be a person who likes attention, so she gets more clicks, so she thinks that's some sort of affirming type of thing, right? So yeah, it is very, it was very, I have to say this, it's very unsettling. It's extremely unfortunate. Our organization's we've been calling it out since the very beginning, even when people didn't like us calling it out. We don't really care. We kind of do what we feel needs to be done. Sadly, on the right, beyond her words, are now other figures politically on the right who are, even if they're not saying the same types of things she's saying, they are attacking Jews and attacking Israel in a way that some people thought would never happen just a few years ago.
I think that's a huge concern. I mean, I've been following Candace's development since she was really very young and got involved with Prager and later with Ben Shapiro. And I think in her earlier days, people thought that she was going to be, quite a hopeful character for the future of Black Jewish relations. And so to see the venom that she spews now, whether it's sincere or whether it's disingenuous, is really quite alarming in a way that makes you not trust your own instincts, in a sense. I wanted to.
No, yes, ma'am. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, please.
No. I just to wrap that one up. Yeah, I think that what it has done, especially on the right, for those who are following her, as a conservative leader and everything, what's been jarring for them is the speed at which it has happened, which is why they were somewhat incredulous, right? There's a lot of denial. I know she doesn't mean that. She doesn't mean that. And then finally they had to go, wow, this is like, I don't understand what's happening here. I think that her, when you couple her with Tucker Carlson, I said she was the kind of the podcast version of it. He was the quote unquote journalist version of it, but the same thing, right? The hatred for Israel, Tucker's direct attack on Christian supporters of Israel, right? This is many people are saying what happened, right? Who had a meeting somewhere and then came out and said, okay, now guys, go after the Jews and go after Israel, right? But clearly something happened in which they became buddies, right? He would have her on a show and she would refer to him, and all of a sudden they're just like best friends, right? Which is what happens when you kind of join into this type of hatred. I tell people all the time, there's nothing like Jew hatred that brings everybody to the table of brotherly love. They may hate each other, right? But they'll sit down, Sunni and Shia and black nationalists and white nationalists, they all sit together and they'll smile and slap each other's back when it comes to Israel and the Jews. That I think took them for a loop, right? That happened so quickly, and other people began to join that band.
Yeah, that's quite alarming. I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier, that in the 60s, people understood that to be against Israel and to be against Zionism was indistinguishable from anti-Semitism. As I'm sure you have seen today, people really make quite a strong and often successful effort to disengage the two. You have universities where you have Jewish presidents who will say, well, this group is not anti-Semitic, they're merely anti-Zionist, as though they themselves don't know better. I'm wondering if you can go into that a little bit more, how you understand it and why you think so many people are really in such a state of denial, at least publicly, and whether you think perhaps they feel differently behind the scenes.
I think that, and we're working on a series of these videos as well. I again talk about this in my book, and I share this on some of the lectures. The emergence of 1964 PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, by the Soviets as a disinformation campaign. Of course, Yasser Arafat becomes the chairman of 1969. And it's not, all of this is not this, but this to me is a huge part of it, to what you're talking about here. This is along with Stalin's, already his efforts that started in the late 40s, early 50s after the Second World War. And he begins to use the oldest hatred in the world, Jew hatred, to try to destabilize the West. The West that has codified with NATO is emerged as strong, of course, United States after the Second World War. He knows that he can't fight that. So it is the disinformation. He calls the Senate a fiefdom of Jewish power, the whole protocols of the elders of Zion. And why do I think all those things are relevant? Because you are demonizing a people and you're demonizing their homeland. It was similar to the way that worldwide attention was brought to apartheid South Africa, which is why they call it the apartheid state, because not only was apartheid a Jim Crow-like evil, but then the white protectors of that system were also then vilified because they were protecting a unfair, unjust system. I think that what they were able to do was demonize Israel as this apartheid, Jim Crow, settler, colonial, and now genocidal, all just pick any bad word and throw it at Israel. It becomes affixed to the Jewish people. And so here what we have now, more than ever before, because of this systematic approach, of course, Zionism is not racism, but that's what they sold, if you will, particularly on college campuses. And so now the uniqueness of Jew hatred, as I think Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, right, a blessed memory, said, it's amorphous. It can become whatever. So now you have the demonization of the Jewish state, the demonization of Jewish people, even if it's a Jew who was born in Brooklyn, has never been to Israel, wouldn't even know how to get there unless you gave him a ticket and flew him there, and doesn't even care. He may even be an anti-Zionist, quote unquote, right? But he, by default, becomes the embodiment of the evil that is Israel. I think that we are seeing a perfect storm of a Jew hatred that's thousands of years old, but that Israel becomes the embodiment of that evil, quote unquote, Jew. All these nasty things gets thrown into this pot that is Israel, so that even if it's somebody in the United States or in Germany or wherever they are, this is why people, they realize it. Somebody who's an anti-Zionist will find somebody Jewish on a subway, at a lunch counter, in a store, and they'll start screaming at them about free Palestine, right? This is, I believe it's a 60-something-year-old psyop that has captured so many people. I'll tell you a quick story. My daughter, one of my daughters, she went to an HBCU. She formed a pro-Israel organization. She was part of Kufai on campus. And the kids were cool. They wouldn't have any problems. Every once in a while, somebody gets some pushback, right? People, I tell people they really understood that the type of anti-Zionism that people think is in the Black community is not there like people may think, right? It's usually, and I'll say some more about that in a second. So anyway, they're set up in a lunch, like at a cafeteria type of thing. And some young lady in the room sees an Israeli flag and she goes ballistic. She runs over to their table. Israel's an apartheid state. What are you doing? And da, 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 da. My daughter just stands there very calm and said, no, you're wrong. Nope. And she was saying, Daddy, it was amazing. It's as if like when a bull sees a red flag. And that's how she knew the conditioning, because we taught them, right? Because she'd never been to Israel. She didn't know what she was talking about, right? This girl's all over 18, 19 years old, right? She just saw the Israeli flag and lost it Now, what is that other than psychological condition? Has nothing to do with Jews, nothing to do with Israel, nothing to do with a free Palestine. It has everything to do with how that person has been triggered. This is what we are seeing now, Laura. I believe that it's been so connected that you bring up a Jewish person, boom, Palestine. The person has, like I say, couldn't find Gaza on a map. They have no idea what they're talking about, but they've been conditioned to even almost like a Pavlov type of response to it. That's the scary part of where I believe the West is right now, particularly.
Do you think the Black community is been targeted in particular or is especially vulnerable? Or do you think it's just one more of many groups and it just seems more prominent these days?
The former, and I mean by that earlier particularly. So, and I'm glad you asked me that question because often people are unclear by what I mean. Number one, not that there's not anti-Semitism. Yeah, according to the ADL back in the late 90s, they measured, however they do the survey, anti-Semitism was slightly higher in the Black community than it was in the Latino and the white community. There's like something like 23% in the Black community, 17% in the Hispanic community. This was back, if I'm saying these numbers correctly. So it's definitely there. It's not the majority, but it's definitely there. What it is particularly right now, I don't know, and that would take too long to explain why that's a funny thing to do. What I'm saying is that targeted meaning this. It was a marketing campaign. The Palestine Liberation Organization and Yasser Arafat, who descended from the Nazi thing, like his uncle, who was the Grand Mufti, right? Okay, so this was clearly, it had nothing to do with from the river to the sea. We all know here, let's be real, that's just tongue in cheek of saying we're going to slaughter the Jews and throw them into the sea. That's all that means, right? Has nothing to do with a two-state solution, nothing like that. But here's the thing, you all, in terms of human nature, no one's going to take you seriously if you just set up shop somewhere in a corner and go, I want to kill all the Jews, right? They'll just dismiss that person as, well, I'll take the Yiddish word, mashugana, right? Whatever, right? But if they say, I want freedom, I want liberation, I don't want to be oppressed, most people will listen to that, right? So how do you sell something like that? How do you sell a Nazi desire to destroy Israel and the Jewish people as a freedom movement? Well, you have to get a name. Liberation sounds good, right? Who's not for liberation, right? And you have to get a visual. Hence, photos of Yasser Arafat and Jesse Jackson, Yasser Arafat and Nelson Mandela, Yasser Arafat, and you following me? What he did was sell it. And he was telling the world, just like Black folks, whether on the African continent or in America, had to fight for their rights. Of course, you had to airbrush the Jews right out of that fight, right? Both in South Africa and the United States, the Jewish people who played a huge role in both of those fights, right? You have to remove that and say, just like our Black brothers and sisters had to fight for their rights, so the Palestinians have to fight against the evil Zionists. That's why the Black community was targeted. They didn't care what Black people thought. The PLO didn't care about Black attitudes any more than they cared about the Arab Palestinians. They don't care about those people. What they cared about was what it looked like. That's why Yasser Arafat would use child soldiers and human shields and suicide bombers, right? He didn't care about the people. He just wanted to be able to say Israel killed these people. That's all he wanted, right? That's what it was for. So the Black community was to show everybody, see, okay, this is why when the Students for Justice in Palestine set up in college campuses, the first group that they try to form an alliance with is the Black Student Union. Why? Because they know they have zero credibility until they're standing next to somebody who at the very least represents the struggle to freedom, the struggle to justice, right? This is why when leftist Jewish groups join those Palestine groups, what do they say? As a Jew, blah, blah, blah. As a Jew, why? What they're trying to say is, I'm taking my credibility as a Jewish man or woman, and I'm saying that Israel needs to be destroyed. Are they a large percentage? No, but they're hoping that when people hear that I'm a Jewish person who now agrees with you that Israel's an apartheid state, it gives them more credibility. That's how the Black community was targeted. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. And what about the relationship between the Arab world and Africans and African Americans? Doesn't this exploitation get us away from the main topic of the extreme racism in their communities and things that people like Zohar Mamdani and others will probably think about or maybe do to the African American community?
This was part of the PSYOP. That in order for me to sell that whole thing I just showed with you, I have to A, effectively lie about Israel. Boom, we check that box, right? And B, I have to hide for you the most racist, anti-Black, anti-African societies on the planet where millions of Africans are enslaved to this day. I have to hide that from you or my whole shtick is gone, right? And that was the psyop as well, because let's get Westerners are far removed from that part of the world. And just like they think Israel is a settler, colonial, white occupying nation, they don't know that there's millions of slaves in Mauritania and Sudan and Algeria and Qatar and Saudi Arabia. And they are part of a 1,400-year-long slave trade that's called the Trans-Saharan slave trade, right? This happened in the 7th century, shortly after the death of Muhammad. And Islam, in less than a century, spread from Mecca all the way up to North Africa, where Libya and Morocco are, including parts of the Mediterranean. And what does it do? Kill, burn, destroy, especially Africans. This is why to this day, even the biased United Nations has declared Sudan the greatest humanitarian crisis on the planet. Of course, the media doesn't care because they'll tell you that Palestine is the only thing that exists, right? And why are those Africans being slaughtered? Because they are Arab Muslims killing and enslaving African Christians and African Muslims because they're African. That's been going on for millennia. So yes, you have to hide that in order to sell that Israel's an apartheid state and try to get Black leaders to support your cause. Can I add one last thing? This was more known up until you get to the 90s, and we talk about this as well. We'll be releasing some more material on this, meaning there was more engagement within the Black political class in the States about Africa until around the 1990s. And there's different reasons for that. And not the least of those had to do with the Nation of Islam. Louis Farrakhan, who ran interference for the slavery that was going on in Sudan and told his huge audience, there is no slavery in Sudan. And why would he do that? Well, whose side is he on? Yasser Arafat's, right? So he can't tell everybody that Islam also enslaves Africans because he's a Muslim. Yes, he's not a, regular Muslim, of course, as Malcolm X said, that brand of Islam, they don't even recognize, even other Muslims, right? But the point is that he was trying to make other Black people understand that Christianity was the white man's religion, but Islam was the Black man's religion. And in order to sell that, you'd have to hide the fact that Christianity abolished slavery back in the 1900s, right, or 1800s, but Islam has not. And there's still millions of slaves and they're being slaughtered. So that if they knew those things, right? So there was that part of the psyop as well. Hide the fact that there are slaves to imperial Islam who look like me all over Africa and the Middle East. And if you can hide that, then maybe you can sell that Israel's an apartheid state.
I'd love to bring it back. Wow, that is really fascinating history. And it is quite remarkable to think that there are slaves to this day and that so few people are actually paying attention to it. I know that you and my old friend Charles Jacobs had brought tremendous attention to that cause, and it was a really a very beautiful effort and a very important effort that you went to call attention to it. I want to switch topics now a little bit to the way some of the tension between the Black and Jewish communities manifests today in the form of diversity efforts, DEI, the BLM movement. I think on a lot of college campuses, there has been this conflict has been set up as though there's a zero-sum game between elevating or admitting or promoting qualified Blacks and qualified Jews. And to me, a little bit of a red herring, because frankly, I'd sooner try to direct attention to the money coming in from Qatar and other sources that are promoting the lies that you're talking about. But I think it is important that we discuss a little bit, how do you see the DEI movement itself? Do you think that the efforts to the Trump administration, for example, is very much against it and wants to see it eliminated? Do you think that's necessary? Do you think that's valuable? I'm curious how you see these issues.
What's interesting, yes, DEI has been the bane of the existence of both Black folks, Jewish folks, and everybody. It is an unfair, unjust system. It has nothing to do with equal access and any of those types of things. It has everything to do with everything from demonizing either white people or Western culture and lowering standards, right? This is the DEI has been used for lots of excuses and has not produced any of the close to the utopian results that people who supported it say that it will. It's actually an extension of an argument that started in the 1970s under affirmative action, which was one of the other things that brought tension between the Jewish and the Black communities back then. As affirmative action was used to give ostensibly Black people more access, it was something that was not accepted by the vast majority. Thomas Sowell was one of the ones uh, uh, um, what's the word I'm looking for? The voting, the polls about in the Black community about how they felt about affirmative action, and they're completely against it in the sense of quotas, right? The fight organically for equality in the nation with the Black community was for access, right? It was for the equal distribution of things like the taxes when it came to school districts, that type of thing. Had nothing to do with how many Black people X, Y, and Z, lowering standards, nothing, because they saw it rightly as an offense. If you're going to lower the standards for me, that means you don't think I'm capable. And if I can't pass the standards here, then I'm not capable. And this is not what the fight was within the Black community. It became that, unfortunately, by some people who kind of started to re-engineer what they want to be more political and instead of more of a justice issue, if you will. And political meaning also the money, so like DEI directors, if you will. First of all, the vast majority of them aren't even Black. Most of the people do it, they're actually white. And when you look at the actual statistics, who those actual officers are, both in schools and in the jobs. But also the other thing is this, that it hasn't produced any of the results that were supposed to be this equal opportunity, this equal access, and it has shunned Jewish and Asian students, particularly on these college campuses, by setting quotas for this many people that would almost always exclude Jews and Asians, right? Who would often would perform often higher than some of the other demographics. That just was what it was. People didn't want to admit that. People didn't want to have that discussion. So it became unfair to have this many Asians, Jews, or whatever these things. So now we're going to have this many spots for Black people, this many spots for Hispanics. But again, none of that was the spirit of the original organic fight for civil rights, which was equal access to. And I have to say this. For those, for example, they look at it usually in the college thing. Oh, the colleges, there needs to be more representation. There needs to be more Black attorneys. There needs more Black doctors. And our organization, along with others, have always kind of chuckled and said, but here's the problem. The public school system in many of these areas across the country are the worst of the worst. And you don't seem to care that these kids can't read at grade level, but somehow they're supposed to become doctors in postgraduate work. It doesn't work that way. If you can't read at the 5th grade level, you're probably not going to go to college and you're probably not going to get a law degree, right? But for those who get concerned about what it looks like on the campuses, but don't care about what's going on through K through 12, they're showing you that they have another agenda that has nothing to do with equality. So DEI has produced so much anti-Semitism on the campuses because it's been defined as anti-white, anti-Western, anti-Israel, anti-Zionist. These things are some of the DEI officers in places are some of those rabid anti-Semites that there actually are because of the very things that we're saying. One of the people that we interviewed several years ago, boy, I can't remember her name right now. I'm so sorry. She was at De Anza College in Southern California. It made Tabia Lee. People can Google her name, Tabia Lee. We did articles about her as well. She happens to be African American. She was the DEI officer, if you will, of that college. But she approached it from a very she wanted to do her job in the way that would be the most equitable, or the most realistic. Let's then make sure that no one is marginalized. Let's attack things like anti-Semitism. And she wanted to do things, you can read it in our article. Let's have then define an Arab Heritage Day and a Jewish Heritage Day and a Black American. She tried to approach it in the most holistic way that you could possibly approach something like that. She was completely rebuffed by her colleagues. No, we don't want to do that. We wanted to tear down the white patriarchy. And she was like, the face you just made, Laura, she's like, well, wait. I'm wanting to celebrate everybody. And I want to make sure they're like, no, that's not what we're here for. And then she realized that it was all a game, that she took a job, and in her heart and mind, she was going to make sure that this campus was fair to everyone and everybody had the access and had right to learn. No. And she tried to come against anti-Semitism. They called her a stinking Zionist. She had Jewish people come on along with this she did like a seminar type of thing. They attacked the people that she introduced, that she invited. All of these things. It was very clear to her that it was not about some sort of diversity, equity, inclusion. This was anti-Jew, anti-white, and wouldn't even let her celebrate things like African. Let's celebrate African Americans and let's celebrate. No, let's focus on white people. That's what DEI has become. And for those who get, not you all, those who are listening to this getting bent out of shape, we have all the receipts. There's been so many studies that have been done and so many op-eds that have been written based on those studies to prove what I'm saying is true. Where the DEI is, Jew hatred goes through the roof.
Let me add one more thing to that that's been puzzling me for years right now. I grew up in a very liberal family, Democratic supporting family in the 60s and 70s. And I grew up believing that Black Americans, Jews, were all the same, we're just Americans. And I thought I was supposed to be colorblind. Then I found out being colorblind is some type of sin against the Black community. Could you just explain that to us, unpack what happened and how that all changed?
That became the moving target. So what happened was, unfortunately, as you progressed in the whole, what was supposed to be equal access, I believe there was Robert Woodson of the Woodson Center said that he was a young man as part of the civil rights movement. And he was there when he said it turned from a civil rights movement to a race grievance movement. People can Google his name, Robert Woodson. And we're saying that it became less about equal access and more about money and power. And he has some fascinating stories to tell about how that actually happened, both within the Black political class and those that were actually working with them. So to your point, Daniel, once it becomes about money and power, I have to keep grievance going. In other words, there can never be a situation where, okay, although we are as flawed human beings, nothing's ever going to be perfect. Here we have now access and we have a system in place that someone, regardless of their race, ethnicity, gender, religion, as an American, has the right and the ability to pursue what the founding fathers said, right? Pursuit of happiness, right? If that is my stated goal, I'm going to really be bothering the person who that's not their goal. Booker T. Washington said back in the early 1900s, there's a class of individual who basically, I'm a paraphrase, right? Because I can never say it as eloquently as he could. They don't want the problem over. They need the problem there 24/7 so that they can raise money and so that they can have grievance. So now, when we look at it that way, principally, it's not specific to any religion or ethnicity. It is a human thing. The PLO needs the conflict so that Hamas can continue to be the third wealthiest terrorist organization on the planet, right? If I'm representing a depressed or economically depressed Black district and I don't want it to get any better, I need there to be no jobs and no better schooling so I can stand there at the lectern and blah, 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 talk about how unfair this, that, and the other. And again, as we talked about it, you and I know that unfortunately, whether it's the Jewish community, somebody who's not maybe working against anti-Semitism, but they need anti-Semitism, even if it's not there at that moment, so they can say this is anti-Semitism and raise a certain amount of money. Unfortunately, that becomes a broken human condition. What we've done, for example, in calling out certain things, I love what Dr. King said it. I got a quick story. I'll do it real quick, right? We pastors, we get old, we have other stories. I recommend everyone please read that Rabbinical Assembly document that actually of Dr. King's last meeting with the rabbis. It's just a Q&A, right? It's 13 pages long, right? It's a fascinating look to 1968. It's a snapshot, right? Dr. King has asked a similar question that you just asked me. Dr. King, what's up with this whole anti-Semitism we're seeing in the Black community? Because we've never seen it before, right? We know what anti-Semitism is, obviously, but we've never really seen this before, and he's answering it. And he gives a long explanation about specifically the Black and the Jewish community. And he says, and I can almost quote part of it, the Negro sees the Jewish person in two disparate roles. On the one hand, he sees him as a fellow fighter for justice. On the other hand, some of these inner cities, he's seeing someone who's sometimes not fair to him. Now watch me. He says, sometimes as the landlord, sometimes as the store owner. And Dr. King is very careful, and he says this. He says, it's not when they see something negative from a Jewish person, it's not because he's Jewish. He's just doing something maybe he shouldn't be doing. Watch this. He says, and we call it out as an organization. He said, if they're Black landlords and business owners, we call them out. And what he was saying was what I'm saying now. He says if someone does something bad, it's not because they're Arab or Jewish or black or what. He said it's because that person is doing whatever it is that they're doing. But Dr. King said what's happening is that if there's conflict, there's other people who are blowing it up and making it into something else. That Jewish landlord, that Jewish store owner. And he said that, and it was brilliant because he was telling them is that this is how the game is getting played. The people who hate Jews, the people who don't want Jews and blacks working together, they're going to try to find whatever they can find. Okay, another example. Christians are the freest in the Middle East and in Israel. Do they get sometimes harassed? Sure. I'm a Christian in the United States of America. We get harassed here. It's the greatest religious freedom. So what they'll do, they'll say, when Christians go to Israel, they get spit on. You guys heard that before? Christians are treated X, Y, and Z. Did they have a bad experience with such and such? Yes, it was a marginal thing, but they make it sound like it's a policy of the Israeli government. Like the Knesset is sitting around and saying, when you find Christians, slap them around. No, that's completely not true. They're completely free. But what do the Jew haters and Israel haters do? They have reels and videos and whole articles about how evil Christians are treated in Israel. Hence Tucker Carlson telling people, you're not free there. That was the very thing that Dr. King was actually addressing. He's saying, this is not the issue, but other people are trying to make it the issue. I hope that long explanation made sense.
What do you think is behind the propaganda that you keep referencing and the publicity that you keep referencing? Where is it coming from today? I know you said in the past it was from the Communist Party and from Stalin. Mm-hmm. Where is it coming from today in 2025?
All the people who inherited. It's funny. You know that China has a lot to do with the anti-Israel propaganda that goes on in our campuses right now. Just like China, we found out a couple of years ago after October 7th, they fund some of the Palestinian terrorism that's actually going on there as well, right? So what you've had is people, it's as if Stalin and his people set up the apparatus, but it could be accessed by anyone. Qatar, before, not too long ago, it was the UAE and Saudi Arabia until they started coming against the Muslim Brotherhood, that type of thing. You have it being funded by foreign bad actors, as well as those in our country who are actually, so remember after the protests of October the 7th, and whether it's campuses were basically on fire, basically, the encampments and everything, we found out, ladies and gentlemen, that, or some of us knew that already, most of those protests were being funded by the Democratic Party, by the top donors within the Democratic Party. And they're different people, Politico, JNS, they wrote articles about it. They named names, right? They said, these families, these people, right? So in answer to your question, Laura, because it became a approach that worked, if you will, other people they franchised it. Right? This is part of what's actually happening. Some people, there's one gentleman, I can't remember his name right now, was talking about China's role with Black Lives Matter, how it was funding some of that, right? Why in the world, right? So people think, what's going on? Well, if China wants to destabilize the West, like Stalin did, and what he did was always tried and true method, yes, what would you do? You would stoke the flares of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, black grievance, and anti-Semitism, all these things together, because what do? They tear at the fabric of the nation. So Israel's hatred within the veins of too many in America, it becomes a national security threat of ours. Because not only are we demonizing who is our ally in the Middle East, we are taking our eyes off the ball, because while we're doing this, Islamism is, right? You said Mamdani, he's this close to becoming the mayor, right? And everybody's so busy fighting about the Jews, right? And about Israel, that they're not paying attention to what the actual real thing. This is why the trope that Israel did 9/11 has been so shared that Al-Qaeda has been airbrushed from Al-Qaeda did 9/11, right? But Al-Qaeda, oh, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is still alive and kicking, still has training camps all over the place, and operative in the United States. But it is amazing, we never talk about Al-Qaeda. We talk about the Jews. We talk about the IDF. So in answer to your question, Laura, it's everywhere because people have learned how to use it, from foreign actors to bad political actors here, because the effect is the same. Keep the pressure and the focus on the quote unquote Jews while we run cover for the terrorism and everything that's actually destroying our country.
And what do you think, finally, is the best strategies? What are the best strategies for strengthening Black churches and the Jewish community today? How do we combat this together?
Number one, our organization is always education. Education is empowerment. So most of what you and I have talked about here over the last few minutes, Laura and Daniel, most people aren't aware of it. They're aware of the history, I bet you people who listen can maybe connected some dots. And what did the prophets say? My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, right? So, what our organization attempts to do first and foremost is educate and empower. We do something that's called the Forum on Israel, Africa, and Black America. We do it virtually, but we also do it in person, mostly here in the States. But I'm talking to our African colleagues as well about doing something similar there because it is a matter of teaching, educating, and from there empowering, right? As we said before, if you don't if they don't know what the real state of Israel is, the story of the nation of Israel, the Jewish people who've returned, not only just who've always had a presence there for thousands of years, but have returned to their homeland from literally all over the world. If they don't know that some of the people lying to them are actually enslaving people who look just like them, that type of thing, right? So once we have found in real time that when we unpack these things for Black leaders, the overwhelming response is always positive. 90 something percent of the time. Thank you very much, Pastor Dumisani. Thank you, IBSI. I did not know. We were just in Atlanta a few weeks ago. We had our forum on Israel, Africa, and Black America. There's an older Black deacon that was there. We started talking after it was over, and we've done the same thing in DC. We hear the very same things. Thank you. I didn't know this. I wasn't aware of this. I learned so much, right? What you have done, if you, as my friend say, you've inoculated them. So our goal isn't so much to pass out Israeli flags and have them running outside singing Am Yisrael High. That'd be great, right? You want to go to a pro-Israel event? That's great. Our goal is to show them substantively with receipts, here's the truth. This is what the PLO says. This is what Hamas says. This is what Al Jazeera says. Here's what CNN says. Here's the truth. Here's what you need to know. And we unpack it. And we have, the reason why we do it in a long form like that is so there can be question and answer. All of our presentations, we cover everything from the modern state of Israel to Black Jewish energy to the slave trade. One of our guest speakers is Simon Dang, another friend of Charles Jacobs, who is a former slave in Sudan. He comes and he stands before them, and there's Black leaders listening to this man. Why? Because CNN's not going to talk to him, right? They're not going to. And by the way, many of the other pro-Israel organizations, all due respect, nothing negative, they won't either because it's too controversial, right? It becomes controversial. I was just in Chicago a couple weeks ago, and one of the panelists, my good friend Peggy Shapiro, said, Pastor Misani, is a scripted questions. Why don't more people talk about the slavery that goes on in the Arab Islamic world? That's very easy. Because it's not white people enslaving them. If it was Brussels, if it was Paris, if the slave trade were being conducted by those Western European powers who did the transatlantic slave trade, there'd be an international abolitionist movement. But the slavers are brown, right? They're Muslim. So we can't talk about that because of Islamophobia. When we unpack these things with Black leaders, and oftentimes they didn't know or couldn't really discuss it, they are overwhelmingly grateful and empowered by the information that they receive.
Well, it's a privilege to help you get your message out there to an additional audience. And we hope that many people who are listening will take you up on what seems to be a very wonderful offer to have people from your organization come out and make their presentations in their communities.
We love to do it. Y'all reach out to us, ibsi.org, and we'll be there. We love doing it. It is a passion of ours, and we believe it's more important now probably than ever before.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
Excellent.
You,
Thank you so much.